You're lost in the desert. The sun scorches every green tree along the roadside. Your lips are dry and cracked. But did you know? Your ancestors lived here. Not just for a few years, but for generations. For about 2 million years, part of humanity's story unfolded in lands like this. Not lush forests, not river valleys, but deserts. The Kalahari Desert, the fiery red interior of Australia. Places where a modern man, unarmed, would die of thirst within a day. Yet entire cultures didn't just survive there. They thrived, raised their children, told stories around campfires for tens of thousands of years. So how? How did they find water in a place that seemed to have no water? The answer isn't a simple trick. It's an entire system of knowledge, passed down so precisely that some of it is still used today. And once you understand it, you begin to realize something disturbing. The people we once called primitives read and understood the desert with a skill that most of us, with only smartphones and satellite maps, cannot match. Let's start with the ground itself. In the western desert of Central Australia, Aboriginal groups like the Martu don't wait for a river to appear. Rivers, in the way you picture them, barely exist there at all. Instead, they read the land for something older and more permanent. Certain rock holes and underground soaks, known in several western desert languages as Jila, hold water year-round, fed by aquifers hidden beneath the sand and spinifex grass. These living water places aren't random. They're mapped in extraordinary detail, passed down through song lines, oral tracks of story and memory that encode the exact location of water sources across hundreds of kilometers of open desert. A songline isn't just a story. It's a survival manual, sung. Beyond the permanent Jila, there are shallower soaks called jumu, pockets of moisture trapped just beneath dry creek beds. Digging one out doesn't take machinery. It takes knowing precisely which slight dip in the sand, which cluster of plants, which subtle change in soil color signals water close enough to the surface to reach with bare hands. The anthropologist Richard Gould documented much of this world firsthand in the late 1960s, living alongside Western Desert Aboriginal groups and publishing his findings in the 1969 study, Yiwara. Foragers of the Australian desert, Gould found something that surprised outsiders used to imagining desert life as a constant, desperate scramble. Water wasn't the enemy. It was a resource with an address, if you knew how to read the map written into the land. And that map lived in memory long before it lived on paper. But digging isn't the only method. Sometimes the water isn't underground. It's inside something alive. Certain desert plants store moisture and nutrients in thick, fibrous roots, tucked far below the baking surface. The desert yam, a staple bush food across much of Central Australia, is identified by the faint traces of vine left on the surface, a thread-thin clue connecting a dead-looking patch of sand to a living reservoir underneath. Dig it up, and you get both food and moisture in a single plant, one of the reasons it has remained a dietary cornerstone for tens of thousands of years. And then there's a method that sounds almost too strange to be true: catching water inside animals. Across the central desert, a burrowing water-holding frog of the genus Cyclorana survives long dry seasons by tunneling underground and storing water in its body, sometimes for a year or more at a time, waiting for the next rain. Aboriginal people learned to locate these frogs by reading subtle surface cues in the sand, then gently squeeze them to release the stored water into their mouths, before returning the frog unharmed to the ground. It sounds bizarre to modern ears, but it's a precise, sustainable technique built from an intimate, decades-deep understanding of a single desert species, refined across countless generations of trial, memory, and teaching. This is the pattern behind almost all of it. Not one dramatic discovery, a layered stack of small, specific knowledge, tested against life and death, then handed down so it never had to be rediscovered from scratch. Now let's reconstruct the day. You wake before sunrise, while the sand still holds the night's cooling. The heat hasn't arrived yet, so this is when you move. An elder points toward a low rise on the horizon, a place marked in the songline you learned as a child, long before you understood what it meant. You walk there. When you arrive, you don't dig randomly. You dig exactly where you've been taught, a shallow hole in a spot that looks to an untrained eye indistinguishable from the sand around it. Moisture rises. You drink. Later, As the sun climbs and the ground becomes too hot to touch, you shelter and wait. This is when the desert kills people, in the hours of full sun, when moving means losing more water through sweat than any soak could replace. Your ancestors knew this instinctively. Activity in the cool hours, stillness in the heat. The desert rewarded patience and punished urgency. By evening, you're not just hydrated, you're fed. The yam you dug earlier gets roasted over a small fire. Nothing is wasted because nothing can afford to be. Now here's the counterintuitive twist. We tend to imagine desert survival as a battle against the environment, a war of human willpower against a hostile landscape. But that's not really what this was. Aboriginal desert peoples weren't fighting the land. They had, in a very real sense, made peace with it. They didn't try to carry water with them everywhere, the way a modern hiker packs bottles. They built an entire body of knowledge around the desert's own hidden water cycle, encoded not in books, but in song, learning to read the land the way you might read a familiar face, noticing tiny signals the rest of us would walk straight past. The desert wasn't empty to them. It was full of water. You just had to know where to look. And most people, over thousands of years, simply forgot how. That forgetting happened fast, historically speaking. As colonization disrupted traditional movement across country and populations were pushed toward permanent settlements, this deep, oral, hard-won knowledge stopped being practiced daily by everyone. And knowledge that isn't practiced tends to fade. Some of it survives only because researchers arrive just in time to document it, and because many Aboriginal communities have worked deliberately to keep it alive, passing songlines and water knowledge to new generations even as the world around them changed completely. Which brings us to something a little unsettling. Right now, you almost certainly have running water in your home. Turn a handle, and it appears clean, cold, unlimited in seconds. It's so automatic that most of us have never once had to think about where water actually comes from, let alone how to find it if that handle stopped working. For nearly the entire span of human history, that single skill, knowing how to find water, was one of the most valuable pieces of knowledge a person could carry. Today, it's almost extinct, not because we don't need water, but because we've outsourced the knowledge of finding it to pipes and infrastructure most of us will never fully understand. There's something worth sitting with in that. The people who lived in the world's harshest deserts weren't struggling against nature with primitive tools and no answers. They were carrying, in memory and in song, one of the most sophisticated environmental knowledge systems humans have ever built, refined over tens of thousands of years, tested against the highest possible stakes. We call it primitive. It might be more accurate to call it mastery. So the next time you turn on a tap without thinking twice, remember this. Somewhere in your deep past, an ancestor knelt in dry sand, followed a memory older than any map, and pulled water straight out of the earth. You are here today because they knew exactly where to look. The desert was never really empty. It just took someone who knew how to listen.